G'day and welcome back to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you to the seventh in the Emerging Leader podcast series. And today I'm looking forward to speaking to my next guest. He works as a rural property sales and marketing specialist and is the co-founder of Thank a Farmer for Your Next Meal Proprietary Limited. Can I welcome to the podcast Mr. Sam Johnston? How are you, Sam?
Good, thanks, Eric. Very glad to join you on the podcast today.
Mate, this is brilliant. Thanks for coming on board. I know, like all of us, you're working through the day, and so I appreciate your time after hours. Look, I'd just like to start, if I can, with the actually before we get started with the questions, just a bit of your background. So, what have you been doing to get into the leadership positions that you've gotten yourself involved with, Sam?
Look, it's a good question. I've actually had to do a bit of this leadership talking and what got me into the space with a couple of the programs I've applied for. And I think it really goes back to being brought up on the farm. Like I was where it sort of started, and it was definitely, I reckon, my rural upbringing and in the central west of New South Wales at a small community of Coronella, about 50 kilometres west of Forbes. And look, I think that's where it all started. And I think it really based on watching the old man farm and watching what he was doing right from day dot. And they're the sort of first memories I have as a kid and ones that I still cherish today. So I think that's definitely what got me excited and wanting to get involved in leadership. And look, there's been a handful of stuff that I've done today, and especially the last 2 or 3 years that have been worthwhile doing in the leadership space.
That's excellent, Sam. Look, I'll start with the questions around leader capabilities, if that's okay. So, from your experience, what do you see as the most critical leader capabilities that you've come across in your time in the workspace?
I'm glad you asked this one, Eric. It was actually pretty much bang on with the question that I was asked in my application for the Rural Agricultural of New South Wales Rural Achiever Program. And I pulled out the old notes there just before you got me on the line. And what I put down was I've got to sort of differentiate between good and great leaders. What I said was that good leaders are honest, passionate, and lead by example. But then I went on to say that great leaders are inspiring, accountable, and most importantly, genuine. So being genuine, I was sort of identifying as my biggest, most important and critical factors of being a great leader. So I believe that sets the foundation for all the other components. And if a leader has that, in my experience, I suppose, then they'll do good things for you and the body that they represent.
So, as part of that, and thank you for sharing that. That gives a very good perspective on where your mind is on this issue. From a leader capability perspective, I've got 3 areas that I have an interest in, and I'd like to get your commentary if I can. So, the 3 areas of particular interest for me, and I'm just for the sake of the listeners, I'm actually still doing my postgraduate studies, and I'm looking at leadership development. What's come up in the podcast a lot is this idea about communication. So do you feel it's one of the critical capabilities? If you're not a good communicator, you can't ever be a good leader?
Look, I think communications is pretty much key and a fundamental in anything, whether it be a leader, whether it be a good team member. It's definitely a fundamental. I quite often relate things back to stuff that I'm passionate about or stuff that I'm involved in. So if we use agriculture and the agricultural industry as a vehicle for this, I think there's a huge gap between producer and consumer at the moment, and I think the communication between these two parties is definitely key. So when you make the comment there that not being a good communicator will mean that you're not a good leader, I think communication is definitely very important. I think if you can't communicate with the people that you're representing and you can't talk to them on their level and find common ground, then I don't think you're ever going to understand fully what they're about, and I don't think you'll be able to lead them in a way that they want you to lead. So, and at the end of the day, that's what leadership is. It's about representing a body of people or putting yourself out there to make sure that the underlying message of that body of people or corporation that you're representing is heard. So I think communication, definitely is so important, and I don't think you can be a good leader without communicating efficiently, for sure.
Brilliant. I appreciate your views on that. Let me turn now to, and this one I'm very interested in again, because you're part of what I'm calling an emerging leaders segment of leaders that I've been interviewing, and that. What do you believe emerging leaders bring to the table that established leaders don't?
Good question. I think they just bring a different point of view to the table. The last 15 years and 10 years and probably since the iPhone came to be has really changed the way all industries and everything works. If I look at the period of when my father grew up or when my boss grew up, it's a complete different day and age to what I've been exposed to and the experiences that I've had growing up. So I think emerging leaders can bring to the table that sort of, I suppose, a bit more exposure to technology from a young age, and the underlying thing is just a different view on the scenario. But I think it does go both ways. I think it's important for young people and young emerging leaders to also learn from people who've been out there with experience and do as much as they can to offset their inexperience with credibility. And I think, that's just really that different point of view, and a bit of youth and excitement and passion for something that they're just getting into or obviously passionate about in a lot of situations.
Segues quite nicely into the next question, and I have a view on this, and it's been built over some of the discussions I've had with others, not just in the emerging leader podcast, but in the general leadership podcast. Is do you believe the industry that you've worked in primarily has shaped your view of leadership, or more specifically, industries you've been exposed to when you were younger shaped your views now in terms of leadership?
Yeah, for sure. And like I said earlier in my sort of answers, it was really growing up on the farm, watching my old man farm, which was what got me passionate about the ag industry. He was always ingraining in me from right when I was a kid that be yourself because everyone else is taken. And I think that's
that's great.
It's a really good sort of comment for a young bloke to take on board. And I think the reason why I regard a lot of the people that I see as great leaders so highly is because they are genuine and they are just being themselves. You often find probably people that I would classify as not so great leaders are trying to get out there and be someone else or emulate or simulate someone else, whereas they're not, just being genuine, being themselves and not being afraid to make mistakes and say the wrong things. So that sort of genuine personality and character just at the end of the day promotes credibility and inspires people. Another one of the great quotes that my old man said was that surround yourself with positive people, and that positivity is infectious, and it lifts the people around you. So that was just one of those things that, being involved in the ag industry, I see it on a daily basis. It just gets back to that growing up on the farm, seeing what Dad did and seeing how much satisfaction farming and turning a raw set of inputs into a marketable final product brought him. Got to it, and at the end of the day, he was just genuine, very humble about what he did, and I think that's what got me so encouraged and excited about being involved in the industry and doing good things for it.
Yeah, it sounds like it, mate. You can hear the passion in your voice. I was just going to say it's one thing of the ag leaders that I've had the pleasure of speaking to, and you've just confirmed this, that I think land-based agriculture, and I'll say this for the industry that I work in, which is commercial fishing, is that when you meet these people and they're out doing their thing, that they develop I don't know what the nicest way to say this, but their bullshit radar is quite attuned. So they know when someone's not being genuine, and they can smell people not being their genuine selves quite quickly. And that's a good skill to build over time, because you really do want to be able to measure up to people that you're dealing with quite quickly. And I'm sure in your travels, and you'll learn this as you go through your own leadership journey, because as we were talking offline, you're in your mid-20s at the moment.
Yeah, 24. So
yeah, okay. Look,
you
got so much of a career left in front of you that I'm sure you're going to meet a lot of different people in a lot of different leadership positions, and some will be great and some won't be so great. And being able to suss that out quite quickly will be quite advantageous in your wherever your professional journeys end up taking you, mate. So just, I'd like to move to what I'm calling leadership development, some leadership development questions here. And one of them is, what types of professional development have you got yourself involved in now? Just some examples, not just formal things, but what are the types of things that you've done to improve your leadership understanding skills, that kind of thing?
Look, there's one that really resonates very highly with me. It's now called the Agri Futures Horizon Scholarship. When I did it, it was the Rural Industries Research and Development Corporation Horizon Scholarship, and it was basically a scholarship and I suppose personal development and leadership program that was run throughout the duration of your degree, and it was meant to be, or was a degree based in and around agriculture. Look, I look back on these 4 years, and what it really entailed was you did 2 weeks worth of work placement each year, and then you also partook in a 3-day, I suppose you'd call it what would you say? It would be a conference and catch up every year, where you'd work on professional development, personal development, public speaking, etc. And I'd probably have to attribute doing that program to actually completing my uni degree. For anyone that knows me on a personal level, I am not really the greatest in terms of, I suppose, my academics. I went from school into an agricultural economics degree at the University of Sydney, and it couldn't have been in a it was just so out of my league in terms of the microeconomics, the statistics, etc. I basically went from doing no economics at school and not a very high level of maths into a highly economic and math sort of focused degree, which is, and it wasn't easy. I tell you, there was plenty of sleepless nights and very hard exams and assignments. But look, if I look back on it, there was probably a few points throughout the 4-year degree or 4.5-year degree that I was probably ready to pull the pin. And that was probably just due to the fact that I was studying agriculture in Sydney, in a city where there was not a huge amount of other like-minded people around me. And that's not to take anything away from Sydney Uni in the degree, but I probably look back and say, well, do you think Sydney was the best place to study ag? That's a question for another day. But just being involved in those 3-day workshops and getting down to Canberra or Armidale or wherever the conference was held, and surrounding myself with like-minded people and people that were passionate about agriculture and wanting to do good things in agriculture was sort of something I attribute to me staying in the degree and sort of gritting my teeth and sticking to it. And then it also, those 3 days and 2-week work experience blocks were some of the best times of my life. I met so many great people, and the networking opportunities I got. My sponsor was Cotton Research and Development Corporation, and they were very kindly to put me in a placement up on the Liverpool Plains and take me off to the biannual cotton conference. And the amount of people that I met there and people who wanted to help me learn about cotton were just amazing. So I really do attribute that program, and I'd highly recommend it to anyone out there who's doing an ag-related degree to jump online and check it out. But yeah, it's the reason why I stayed in uni. So yeah, it's definitely an awesome experience.
That's thank you for sharing that. That's an interesting perspective that the institution that you chose to do your degree in, and this could be any institution if you don't have people that come from the same type of background, it can make those studies a little bit more difficult and a little bit more disconnected from that sense of place. And that tends to come out quite strongly in the people I've spoken to with an ag background that are still living out in the regions and have said, there's it's interesting doing these types of degrees in an urban setting when the focus is about the regions and rural Australia, not necessarily an urban context. But that I guess that just goes with degrees and where you can get access to them. But thank you for sharing it. That was quite an interesting journey that you took there. So look, and take this as not a disrespectful question, I guess, because I know that it sounds like you had some issues when you were trying to get through the degree. But do you have a view on lifelong learning? Did uni? Hopefully, uni didn't sour that. But do you have a view on constantly picking up something or learning something as you go along?
Look, I'm pretty glad that learning is a very broad term, and it doesn't mean economics degree after economics degree after economics degree.
Sure.
I'd be a bit worried if lifelong learning was that. After that, I'd be in serious trouble and be scratching my head. But look, lifelong learning, I think one of the common things you hear is the day you stop learning is the day you die, and I think that's so true. If you're not learning, then you're in the wrong spot. I've had a couple of sort of big life decisions that I've had to make in the last 6 to 8 months, and one of the best bits of advice I was given, and it did come from my dad, was that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in trouble, which I thought was really good. He said, look, you actually, if you think about it, you don't ever want to be the smartest person in the room, because if you aren't, then you're not learning. And I thought that was a really interesting take on it. I'm not sure if that was just him trying to hint towards me that I'm a bit of a slow learner, but he was definitely dead right on that. And it's been something that I've been able to relate to a lot in the last couple of months, especially coming up with these massive decisions that I've had to make in terms of my life and future career. Going back to my view on it, though, I think my goal and something that I've set to do is just do one good thing each year, whether that's go and do a short course or go and get a truck license, or just my goal is really just to do one good thing each year. And if I do that for the next 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years, depending on how long I make it, I think it's a pretty good start. And I'd be very happy if I got to the end of 80 years old and I can say, look, for the last 60 years I've done one bit of learning or one bit of personal development each year. So I definitely think, it goes back to that saying, the day you stop learning is the day you die.
That's quite a good point that you make there, mate. Look, as part of your travels, you said you got a lot of good professional development out of the program that was that you mentioned before. And did that involve mentoring at all?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I was I think probably the first bit of experience I had to a mentor would have been going away to boarding school. We were, I suppose you call them peer support leaders, is what the school viewed them as. But looking back on it, they were probably a mentor. And for someone who grew up in a very remote and rural community with a public school of sort of 25 or under pupils, 2 classrooms and 2 teachers, to go into a school with sort of 13, 14, 1,500 people and there was 30 people in each class. Also being 5 or 6 hours away from your parents, It's pretty daunting and tough experience. So I'd say my first experience with a mentor was then. And then moving on from that, the Horizon Scholarship definitely was able to give me a mentor. And I did raise those concerns and issues that I had with struggling with my degree. And what they did was they really thought about what I was struggling with and how they could best help me. And what they ended up doing was they paired me up with one of the fourth year scholars in the program. He was another country boy from Trangie, and he was actually doing an ag science degree at Sydney Uni and also living on campus at the same, or had lived on campus at the same college that I was attending. So he was at arm's length and someone that I could call on a daily basis if I was getting tough, or if stuff was getting tough, I needed anyone to talk to. And then more recently, through my involvement with the Rural Agricultural side of New South Wales Rural Achievers Program, at the commencement of this program, we actually were paired up with a mentor as well. So I've just been given a new mentor in the last, I suppose you'd say, 2 months, and I've had a meeting with him in the city about 3 weeks ago, and it was good just to see a familiar face and speak to someone who I could relate to and get a bit of advice off and bounce a few ideas off. So yeah, definitely been a big fan of the mentoring programs, and been heavily involved in my life and my success. I'd say moving from when I was started off at boarding school in Sydney about 12 or 13 years ago. So
that's great, and it seems like it's had a positive impact on you, and it's good to see that in the ag sector that approach is being used to help people sort of get over those humps, or just to be able to have a conversation with someone that knows what you're experiencing, or can at least relate to what you've been doing, which can make the big, a huge difference in someone's career pathway. So that's again another interesting story that you shared with us. Look, can I ask you from those travels that you've just mentioned and those people that you've met, what individuals have you drawn from to help you develop your leadership approach? So you've mentioned your father, and it seems like he's had a very big influence in how you view leadership. But are there others, and you don't have to name them, but are there others that you've drawn upon, either coming through uni or through these programs, through the ones you've just mentioned, or through university?
Yeah, I definitely have drawn on a lot of people, and it really just gets back to what Dad's taught me or told me. Just surround yourself with positive people. You'll always do well when you surround yourself with people having a bit of a go or doing good things. I remember looking right back to my high schooling days. I think in year 10, I was probably causing a bit of trouble, and as 16-year-old boys do, getting in up to a bit of mischief. And one of my teachers left the school or went away for a year or so, and then came back right around the time that I was being announced as the boarding house captain, and he just couldn't believe how far I'd come in those couple of years. And I think that was probably when Dad pulled me aside and said, look, you got to pull your head in, surround yourself with positive people, and get rid of those people in your life or not get rid of them, but tend not to hang out with them as much if they're only going to pull you down. So it was pretty amazing to see one of these teachers just come back and go, wow, I would have never picked you becoming house captain, and what a great job you've done on changing yourself and doing things differently to get there. So look, Dad would be the person I go to in terms of any major decision. If something goes wrong, or the stuff hits the fan, I'd always give Dad a call. But then look, my mates, I'm lucky that I have a really good tight circle of probably 6 or 7 mates who each one of them would be more than happy to drop whatever they're doing and help and support me in terms of, major decisions or even just developing my leadership approach moving forward. And then, third, a lot of people would be my network and those mentors that have been continually big supporters of mine and helped me right from the day dot. So, 3 groups of people: my old man, mates, and then the wider network and mentors.
So in your travels, Sam, do you think there's such a thing as a perfect leader?
I'm going to say no. I think a perfect leader is his own worst enemy, if there was such thing. If you go back to the saying that I rattled off a few times before, where the day you stop learning is the day you die. If that person was a perfect leader, then I don't know if they're dead or what the story is, but look, everyone should continue to develop themselves. And if someone's perfect, then I'm yet to see them or get exposed to them. So no, I think the simple answer is no. There's no such thing as a perfect leader.
Okay, great. And finally, Sam, and this is one that I'm asking in all the podcasts, is I really like the responses I get to this one, and it kind of will draw together some of what you've been saying, or maybe you'll surprise us with something out of left field. But your reaction to this statement: leaders are born, not made.
Look, I did hear Emma answer this question, and what an exceptional young woman she is, and doing great things in the ag sector. But I did hear her listen to this, and I said, I just think to myself, well, how would I answer that, and what would my sort of thoughts on it be? And look, I got on the phone, trusty old dad, spoke to him and asked his advice on it. Prior to speaking to him, I was probably more of a leaders are born rather than made, so fence sitter, but towards the born side. And then just after hearing Emma's response, speaking to dad and having a bit of an open mind, look, I think they're not born. I think quite often people do get put in exceptional circumstances or surround themselves with positive people and either not forced into a position but thrown into a position where they have to, or thrown in the deep end and made to swim. So I think there's a huge range of factors that lead to great leadership capabilities. And look, if you can just be yourself, I think that's a step in the right direction. But there's always ways to better yourself as a leader. And I would say that I was definitely not born a leader. Looking back on it, I was given a few opportunities to lead my peers and lead my sort of bodies that I was representing, and I really enjoyed that. And I think the reason why I got involved and why I was so happy to do that is because that any organisation, institution or body that I was ever representing was something that I was passionate about, or sort of had a bit of not an obligation, but something that they'd been good to me and given me good opportunities. So I was more than happy to give back to them and give them a good plug and lead them. So yeah, that was probably my view on the leadership being good leaders being born and not not made. I think they're made, and they're a whole lot of factors really.
That's a very nice positive way to end the podcast. So Sam, thank you for your time tonight.
No worries, Eric. More than happy to be involved.
So for the listeners, that was Sam Johnston, who has joined me on the 7th of the Emerging Leader podcast. I'd like to also thank all of my other Emerging Leader podcast participants. This has been great, and there'll be more of these to come. And so for the listeners, thank you again, and I'll catch you all in the next podcast.